Hi everyone, this is Jack from ESFI and I'm here with Sundance DiGiovanni. And it is the second day of MLG Providence. So our first question for you, we actually met with you in Columbus after all the problems in Dallas. So looking back on that now and the rest of 2011, what's the biggest lesson that you learned from every event? And what would you consider your biggest triumph at every event?
I think every event is I mean, there are challenges around each and every event, right? And so Dallas was the opener for us, and everybody knows how that went. Don't need to really relive it, but we've always learned more from our failures than our successes. I think that's pretty much true of people as well when they're open to personal change and they're kind of self-aware. So every time we have one of these events, we look at it as kind of compartmentalizing the individual pieces and seeing what we can improve on. We've had League of Legends back here, so we tried to run that in Raleigh. There were issues. There were 2 events going on, so but we've had a success around that today. And I think the key is stringing the entire year together and making sure that at the end of the year, what you've done is wound up in a better place. So a better place in terms of the quality of our events, a better place in terms of the quality of our streams, and a better place in terms of the overall scope and scale of esports. So for next year, because this is going to feed what we do next year. So we're always learning. I mean, hopefully we're always we're not repeating our past mistakes, but learning from them and turning them all into triumphs. So, so far so good this weekend. I think the main thing I've learned this year is that next year I need to find a way to be able to watch some of the games, because that's the biggest disappointment for me so far.
What are your top 3 memorable moments from 2011?
Top 3 most memorable moments. On the positive side, I think the first time we had the Koreans over, seeing the reaction from them and from the Korean netizens on the other side was fantastic, and realizing that our ability to produce this content and to blast it out internationally was going to be so popular and so successful. So that would be number 1. I think number 2 would be the Anaheim event for us. That was we'd always gone to the West Coast and struggled with audience, to be honest, in terms of getting people into the room. And that was, until this event, that was our most, spectated, live attended event. And then I think the next 2 are kind of tied. I think Boxer, the first time Boxer was here, just because of the history around him, was incredible, meeting him and actually getting to know him a little bit. And then Huck winning. Those 2 things I think would be equal, because seeing Huck win was pretty amazing.
So if you had to narrow it down to 1, what was your biggest challenge of this year, and how did you overcome it?
I think the biggest challenge was just convincing people that what our intention was to do this properly. We got last year when we did a trial with StarCraft just to see if we were going to be interested in adding it in full force. We got a little bit of friction around that and the way it was presented. And it was a mess, admittedly so. And then this year, as we had competition in the space and other people looking at some of our successes and some of our failures and trying to capitalize in the space, there were challenges in terms of trying to differentiate ourselves. But the biggest challenge, honestly, is really the internal drive that we have to be the best, to not look at ourselves as one of many organizations, but to try and look at ourselves as the best organization at what we do, providing the best content, providing the best live experience. And so there's a lot of room for improvement constantly, and we've got a lot more work to do.
So last night we started off the event by wrapping up the MLG Global Invitational. It was actually a huge break from the traditional circuit format. Can you give us some thoughts on how you think the event went and if you plan on doing more of the online format in the future?
We were happy with it. I mean, that format is a bit of a challenge for obvious reasons. But to see, I mean, you saw how it played out. You had a player who's had a rough year in some respect, right? Who opened up really well, went on an incredible run, has had success and a bit of challenge throughout the season, throughout the year, not just our event but others, coming back and doing incredibly well, beating arguably 2 of the very best players on the planet, 2 Koreans, back to back. That is possible because of that format. So I think that what you'll see us do is that's not the last time we'll be using that format, but we're going to make changes to it. In an ideal world, whether you were Southeast Asia, Europe, or North America, essentially imagine the regions for the servers, right? You should be able to play there and compete there and rise up to a certain level and then be brought together to see who's the best within that world. Because this format that we have right here it's a different thing. This is about on that weekend who can string 3 days together. Whereas that format is, it's you play your match, you take a break, you play your match. It's not as much of a marathon, and I like both honestly a lot. So I think you'll see more of that in the future.
So this year you actually entered a partnership with the GSL for the exchange program. What would you do differently about the format, just with all the Koreans kind of coming over and having more of a time, or a better time taking advantage of the opportunity? A lot of the foreign players haven't been able to make it out of the second round of Code A. Is there a different format you'd like to try, or will the program change in 2012?
Well, I think we're going to revisit the partnership on a couple of levels, but my goal is, when we started this year, Korea was the center of the universe when it came to competitive StarCraft. I would argue that that's shifted a bit, that maybe there's now two capitals that are sharing, the responsibility of putting out the best product. We've done really well. Our audience for this event has already been record-breaking. Every single event, it goes up and up and up. So what I need to do is I need to figure out a way to bring more meaningful competition to North America or Europe or wherever we may plant the MLG flag. And also to try and create some separation in a weird way. It's like, who's the best players in Europe? And recognizing them and having them play. Who's the best players in Southeast Asia? Recognizing them and having them play. And the same in North America. One of the big challenges is you think about a season of GSL has fewer matches played than one of our weekends. They're not apples to apples, and so that's one of the big challenges. So finding a way for both, the folks who are part of GSL, but also the non-GSL players to have an area to thrive is a big challenge for us for next year. And I'm looking forward to working through that with the GSL folks, but also just coming up with a structure that gives us more opportunity here.
And so I guess depending on what time it is exactly, we're about halfway through MLG Providence. So how is that going for you, and is there anything both positive and negative that has surprised you about the weekend?
We're doing well so far through the first day. We opened up this morning to more viewers than we typically have. In the morning slot, we had our evening numbers. So everything's on the up in terms of viewership. League of Legends is going extremely well. The Global Invitational ended in crazy fashion. We got Nesty here, which has been great. Again, in fact, they're playing right now. I don't know what's going on, but I'm sure if Bloxer wins, we'll hear a huge roar. So far, it's all been good. The most disappointing thing, or I think the thing that I would say isn't necessarily what I would like it to be, is time. There's not enough time in the day for me to do stuff like this, plus catch matches and spend time with the fans, which is something that I like to do.
So with so many of the Korean and European players here in Providence, do you feel that the national championship title is still appropriate for what you're doing, or would you like to move towards a more global brand?
I think that whoever wins this weekend is the best in the world, period. For people playing this game, I said that in the Open, and I think a couple of people called me out, but that's how I feel. This is I would argue this is the most stacked StarCraft 2 tournament in history. If you look at the pools, they're crazy. The open bracket has a guy named Nesty in it. I mean, it's just insane, right? Like, how could this not be the best of the best?
So the national championship is the end of this year's Pro Circuit, but in terms of setup and kind of how the tournaments run, it's basically the same, just with bigger prize money. Do you think that it would be changed in the future, so it's more of like an epic event, something more like the World Series or the Super Bowl?
Well, I think that's going to come down to operational issues and structure. Right, our current Pro Circuit format is, well, I love it on one regard, and the other I hate it. I mean, for 18 days this year, we're the biggest thing in competitive gaming. There's a lot of days that we're not, right? So we need to do something to address that. More matches, more competitive play, more rivalry is what gets you to a place where you've got something that's at the Super Bowl. This, I would say, is the Super Bowl of esports, to use a quote from an article that was recently written for this year. I don't think there'll be anything bigger than this. In fact, I know there won't. But next year, we should be able to dwarf this. If we continue on the current course and speed, we should be able to create something which makes this event look small. And the way to do that is by revising our structure and creating more opportunity for the players and fans to participate in competitive gaming moments. So I think there's a lot that works with this, but it's pretty difficult to load 10 tractor trailers more than 6 times a year. You've got to move to something else. And so we have some pretty big plans about that for next year.
So what are some of the comments that you've heard about the event so far, and do you feel that the national championships are living up to the expectations of the players, the spectators, and the staff?
Yeah, I think the community response has been great. I mean, there's been a lot of positive chatter. I've had nobody yell at me via Twitter, which is great. Reddit seems happy. Team Liquid seems happy. I think that I've had 3 or 4 players come up to me and say, "Where's Nesty landing? Is he going to be in my pool?" Select just came to me and asked me that, and so I think the players are really, they're looking at this as, again, it's not just about the check. I think we get a lot of comments around our prize pool. But the fact of the matter is the player that wins this, as I said, is going to be able to say that they won the most competitive and stacked StarCraft 2 tournament in the history of the game. So holding up that trophy at the end of it is going to be a significant achievement. So for us as an organization, being able to facilitate that is the goal. We always see things that we can improve, but I think seeing the comments, seeing how it's gone so far, we're pretty happy with what's happened through the first day and a half.
So actually, from some of the comments that we've actually heard a lot that the atmosphere on Friday night was a letdown. We possibly think it's mostly just because of the format of the open bracket being played last night. Would you ever consider starting the open bracket earlier, and what can you deduct from this experience?
Well, I think because the atmosphere around the Global Invitational and going from that to open stuff is a challenge, but we had to close out. Those are 2 separate events. We opened our tournament with a tournament, right? So we put the tournament inside the tournament in order for everybody to see it, which is, you're going to have a shift in energy level. But again, I got a few people asking me why they were seeing the matches they were seeing after seeing Nesty, like they want more Nesty. But the fact is, we've got 256 players to get through. I can't just have Nesty playing for 3 days or Boxer playing for 3 days. So I've got to serve those folks as well. And the funny thing is, if you think back, everybody was complaining that there were no open matches being. So it's a classic case of I can't win, but I'll take it over not having those matches. I'll take it over manufacturing something, because that's one thing that we don't do here. Right? Some tournaments or some organizations will structure the matches that are going to be set up based upon trying to get the audience. We let it happen naturally. We could very easily change our structure and turn it into something more like the UFC, but then it wouldn't be a points-based system that works. I'm not saying we won't do that one day, but for this tournament, it's got to be executed up to spec.
So you've actually received a lot of harsh criticism in the past year for a lack of player space, with fans constantly asking for photographs and autographs and just kind of the hype around the StarCraft 2 community. Will you be adapting the venue setup to be a little bit more player-friendly, and what kind of changes would you make to the way things are run?
Well, I think, again, if you think about access to the players, there's reasonable requests and there's unreasonable requests. The fact of the matter is that we have an open format for a reason. Most of the players I know like to interact with the fans. There's a few that get a little, they like to get into the zone and not have to interact. But that's part of the job, I'll be honest with you. If you want to be a pro StarCraft 2 player in this league, you're going to have that. And I don't plan on putting any separation between the players and the community where they're just completely removed, because I think one of the big draws about this is the accessibility. And there are some players who are really good at it. If you see there are some players who will stand, who will sign every autograph, and who will take pictures. I'll tell you what, those are the ones who tend to see a big fan reaction when they're on the stage. So I can't control everything. I can create and we have created an area which is off limits, right, the player pit. But I think some people need to be realistic about it. If without the fans, there are no stars. There are no players who are making a living doing this.
So moving a little bit away from StarCraft, do you think that no bloom and no sprint will increase the competitive nature of Halo Reach?
I really hope so. If not, we're screwed. I think, my heart is I've lived with Halo for a long time now as one of our cornerstone games, and we grew up with that. Our mission was to prove our model around console because the PC space was so busy at the time. Now that those organizations have kind of fallen out, we've been able to expand. But I would love to see a big comeback for Halo with no bloom, no sprint, and I'd love to see Halo 4 actually work for us, because Reach has not worked that well.
What are your thoughts on team shifting during the MLG Pro Circuit season for Call of Duty and Halo? Right.
So the team shifting stuff is something that we have a fix for it next year. Right. We have a big fix for it next year, and as with the point structure as well. Can't get into it yet. We haven't announced it, but I don't like it because what it does is I can't have a Yankees versus Red Sox rivalry if the players are constantly shifting around. right? The Final Boss brand doesn't mean what it used to mean. The Carbon brand doesn't mean what it used to mean. But these are established things that we have, and and there's a little bit of that on the StarCraft and League of Legends side as well. Where you've got player movement happening at kind of random times in the middle of a season. So are they on Team Liquid? Are they on EG? Are they on Complexity? And there's a lot of drama attached to it as well, especially with the kind of Korean partnerships happening. So I think one of the challenges is going to be to try to figure out a structure that makes sense for teams to stay in place, regardless of the game they're involved in. And for team movement to be limited to certain periods of time.
Halo Pro recently commented that players should be contracted to sponsors. What are your thoughts on this?
Should be contracted to sponsors?
Yeah.
Some are. Again,
or do you think that all players should be? Or
honestly, no, I don't. I don't think all players are, because how could you justify that as a business investment? Right, especially when what we just talked about. There's no team stability. There are players who are pros for literally one event. I think that there is, if you're a pro player in our league, there are stipend checks. You're given cash to get to these events. That's at least the old structure. I think in the new structure there needs to be a situation where if you're a pro and you show up to play at certain events, you're paid. Period. And if you win money, great. But that's the only way to get meaningful. That's the only way for you to actually be a pro. By the strictest definition of it. But and again, players are always going to want more exposure and more money. And what I always say is, okay, let's take a look. Look out at that room. Which area would you invest in? Which player draws the most players, fans here? And that's what brands react to.
What titles would you like to add to the MLG Pro Circuit, and what are the challenges of adding a new title? I'd
love to add Diablo. I would absolutely love to. I've been playing the heck out of it, and it's awesome. But I think the challenges are unique to each game, right? So League of Legends, the first time we ran it, there were issues. There were 2 events going on. There were server problems, and that game's a bit of a bear to operate. This time we've nailed it. When we added StarCraft, obviously there were some issues, right? It takes us a little while to get it right. One thing I'll hype up everything we're going to do, but the one thing I'll never do is say that we're going to get it right at the first try, because we never have. Honestly, we have never ever come out and say like, "Hey, I have a great idea. Let's do this completely revolutionize. Let's change something so much that it's going to be just completely different than anything you've seen from us before." Okay, we'll do that, and we'll make mistakes, but we'll fix them. So with new games, as we look at them, we try and prepare for as much as possible. And we test a lot of games, and we get approached by a lot of publishers offering us money to put their games on the circuit. But the game's got to have a community, it's got to work on a competitive basis, and it's got to be somebody that we want to work with in a true partnership. So the challenges are finding games that are up to snuff. Finding a good base of games where you've got a nice diversity out there.
So what are some of the biggest challenges of working with different esports communities? Everything from League of Legends to the fighting game community to StarCraft have their own unique flavor, and how do you deal with the challenges and how do you adapt to each community?
Well, I think it's, I think what it comes down to is that it's an investment of time, right? So I'm not going to lie and say that I have an equal love for each of the games that we run, because I don't. I play, some games more than I play others. But that doesn't mean that I can't get to know how the community operates and some of the passion points and some of the hot topics. So if I can take the time to understand that, and as an organization we can remain true to ourselves while, kind of thinking about those things, then we can do well within those communities. Again, the StarCraft community was open to us, didn't like us, now loves us. So it's a roller coaster. And the thing is being in it for the long run means that you've got to go through that, and you're going to have those growing pains. We've seen that with the fighting games community. We've seen that with some of the shooters we've run. It's interesting that each one has its own little things that you need to be aware of. You can't have the same approach to every community, because then you're not genuinely invested. And so we take the time to try and genuinely get to know who the people are, who the players are, what the issues are, and to speak to them each in a unique way.
Are there any teasers or information you can give us about the 2012 MLG Pro Circuit?
It'll be bigger. There'll be more. Right? I can't really say much else. No, sorry. You're going to see more of what we've done this year well, and hopefully less of what we haven't done well.
So you're a very public person in terms of your involvement within the organization. Have you ever considered taking more of a backseat role, or do you like being in the spotlight?
I would love nothing more than not to have to be the one out in front of it all. I really would, but I just don't think that there's anybody else right now who can do that. Maybe in a year I can go and hang out with my kids a little bit more. But for right now, in order for this to get done properly, it needs to be me.
I pretty much adore the MLG staff. Every time I meet someone, I think they're the coolest person ever. What do you look for when you're trying to hire people, and what kind of things do stand out in terms of character and what you want as a part of your team?
Well, I think there's a test that I use, and it's, if you're on a desert island, would you want this person to be there with you? If it was up to you have to survive. And it's tough because that answer changes sometimes over time. First you say absolutely, and then maybe you're like, well, maybe not anymore. Throw me to the ocean. But I think in terms of character traits and personality, we try and hire from the community as much as possible, right? Because we've had a lot of success there. Where we haven't had success is just bringing people in who are kind of corporate folks. You've got to have passion. You've got to have dedication. You've got to be somebody who sees things through. It's like we're an organization that has a lot of different needs, so what we try and do is get people who complement one another. I know what I'm good at, and I'm pretty tuned into what I'm not good at, so I surround myself with people who are good at the things that I'm not good at.
So at some point in time, you wanted to be on a desert island with Slasher?
No, I can't say that I would choose him to be on the desert island. No, not at all.
So everyone loves the spotlight. How do you keep egos in check among your staff?
Well, I mean, again, the simplest thing is just there's no room for it, really. I mean, I think we've had issues with it in the past, and look, I think I have a very healthy ego at times, but the reality is that it's not about us. It's really not about us. Like I said, one day, hopefully someone else will be able to sit where I'm sitting and give you answers about this because they know it and they've lived it and they've grown up with it, and it's the right time for them to take over. But that's the point, is none of us are bigger than the overall goal, and the overall goal is to provide the best experience in esports possible. So egos are easy. You just it's just, we don't let people celebrate the accomplishments for too long. We move on to the next thing.
What kind of advice can you give for someone who wants to start a career in esports, or who's kind of looking into running their own tournaments, and small or big?
I think the best advice I would give anybody is just, you got to have patience, right? You've got to actually travel a little bit and to see what other people are doing, or maybe not travel, but back in the day you had to. Now you can tune in and watch, but volunteer. See if you can talk with somebody who's already doing it. See if you can learn from somebody else's mistakes rather than making them yourself. But mostly, when you do make those mistakes, own up to them, take responsibility for them, learn from them, and be transparent about it. Like, we're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And the big thing, acting like you're perfect or making excuses isn't going to help you. Just be direct, be straightforward, and I think listen to the community, but also develop the ability to know when the community is asking for too much. And don't ever put yourself in a position where you compromise what your hope or vision is for what you're doing.
MLG is pretty much the epitome of a high-stress live event. How do you deal with pressure, and what do you do to stay calm under stormy seas, and what kind of advice can you pass on to people who are in similar positions?
I don't know. I think, according to some people, I yell a lot, but I don't think I yell a lot. I think I'm pretty level-headed. Do you agree with that? She's just like, no. Again, perspective. There's pressure everywhere. Everyone has pressure. There's no, whatever your greatest pressure moment is, that's all you know. I don't know about anybody else's stresses until I've, experienced something similar. So I remind myself to breathe a lot. I remind myself to walk away from things that are frustrating. Most importantly, to remember that, at some point you're going to look back at it, and those things that were causing you stress or pressure are going to be things you can learn from. So, you got to kind of go easy. You got to take it easy and try and let things be what they're going to be, and, focus on the things that you can make better.
So originally MLG was just an event organizer coming out with tournaments for aspiring video game gamers, and now there's been a big shift in your priorities. Within the last year, it seems like you're turning kind of more into a media side of things, picking up like State of the Game and Fuck Slasher and Julie Show. Was this something that was planned, or was this kind of just something that happened? Well,
we've always had plans to do it. It's just been, again, I only took over as CEO just over a year ago. So, my mission was to right the ship and to get back onto our plan. And our plan is to be a sports media property, right? So we're in the media and entertainment business. We provide a event which is presented as sport. So the things that surround that, the shoulder programming, as we call it, such as the hosted shows or the commentary shows or the preview or review shows, those just make sense. Once you've got a distribution mechanism in place, that's what you do, because content is what we want. I will watch our videos. I learn things from them. I mean, there was a time when we were a smaller organization, and every single piece of video that went onto the web through us was watched by me and approved by me. Now it's too much. I mean, we're doing 3 hours of live programming a day. Next year we'll be up to 6 or 7. It's this is the direction we were always supposed to go in, and more of it being competition, live competition. So it's going to be pretty exciting.
Okay, so that's all we have for you. Do you have any comments, questions, or thank yous that you'd like to add?
I just thank you and everybody else, the folks who work behind the scenes in esports, who have sites like ESFI. I mean, it's important, it's important to understand that these things need support too. It's not just about us, because hopefully we give you a rich canvas to paint on and tell your stories on. But without the sites, without the community sites, without the folks who take the time out, I'm sure you'd love to be watching out there like me. But we do this because we all love it, and so I think the folks are lucky enough to have great sites to go to and see the content. But so I thank everybody who's kind of in we'll call it the struggle. Everyone who's participating in the struggle deserves a big shout out and a big thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.